My name is Anna Mole, and I'm the Congressman's district caseworker. I'd like to formally welcome you all to Congressman Mark DeSaulnier's Town Hall here at Dozier Libby Medical High School. We're so glad you can make it out tonight. I'd like to start by introducing the staff we have here in the building. First, we have our lovely intern, Reese, our district scheduler, Brooke Wilson, our community relations director, Caroline Francois, our senior outreach coordinator, Kaylee DeLand, our deputy district director, Ryan Thomas Brown, and finally, our district director, Janessa Oriole. Now, I'm going to go over a brief run of show and then we will get started. As you may have noticed when you walked in, there's a question card placed on each seat. If you have a question you'd like to ask the Congressman, please fill out the question card entirely and we'll get to as many questions as possible. Given the number of people in attendance tonight, we will not get to every single question. However, I want to note, if you complete your question card fully with your contact information legibly written, we will respond to as many questions as possible after the town hall. If you have a complete question card now you would like to submit, please feel free to raise it in the air, and one of my colleagues will be happy to collect it from you. Any completed question cards? Thank you. Thank you. Next, we have several elected officials in the audience with us tonight. First, we have Jovita Mendoza, Brentwood City Council member. We have Mary Rocha, Antioch School Board member. We have Tamisha Torres Walker, Antioch City Council member. And finally, Ron Bernal, Mayor of Antioch. And now I will turn it over to the Mayor of Antioch, Ron Bernal, to welcome you all to this wonderful city and to introduce the Congressman. Thank you.
All right, I'll pull this down here. So welcome to Antioch. Thank you all for coming out tonight. It's an honor to have Congressman DeSaulnier come and speak to us all here. Being from Concord and having been a supervisor and state assembly congressman, he understands the effects of the decisions that he makes on our local government here, and that's very important. And one of the things that I've observed is that he hasn't forgotten the local government and people that he serves down in our little part of the world. So that's something I'm grateful for. In his role in Congress, this is dear to my heart being an engineer, he's part of the Transportation Infrastructure Committee. And so he deals with things like water, rail, aviation, the hazardous materials, things like that, and all of those things directly impact the city of Antioch. And I don't know if the Congressman is aware, I think he is, that we have a brackish water desalination plant here in Antioch that's about ready to have the switch thrown, that's gonna produce 6 million gallons of new fresh water for the city of Antioch out of the San Joaquin River when the water's too salty to pump and drink. And so that's a $100 million investment that the city is making in this technology, and we believe that it's a technology for the future for a lot of places. The other thing that I'm super impressed and grateful for Congressman DeSaulnier is his involvement with ethics. And he's on the ethics committee, and he wants to bring transparency and accountability to local government in order to give, not local government, to government in general, in order to give government a good name or a better name. And that's something that I aspire to as well in my new role as mayor. And so I thank Congressman DeSaulnier for doing that. So without saying anything more, you didn't come here to listen to me, I'd like to welcome and thank Congressman DeSaulnier for coming to Antioch and working with us.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. It's great to have engineers, analytical people in charge. And I just want to thank you all for coming. I'm going to go through a PowerPoint. How many of you have been to one of our town halls in the past? Okay, we've got some frequent flyers. So we've had more town halls, our office, myself, than any other member of Congress in the last 10 and a half years. That's how long I've been there. This is our 235th, Janessa. About 70% of those have been in person, and then for those of you watching. So I like them. I've always done a lot. And I say this, I think it's because my other vocation career was in the restaurant business, and if you didn't listen to your customers as a restaurant owner, you were in trouble. So I've always felt good about listening. We don't always have to agree. Sometimes I'm wrong, and sometimes I tell this to my colleagues. And I'm hoping we get back to that, where we can have civil, spirited, rule-based discussions, because that's when government can be challenging, but also can be tremendously rewarding, is working together. And we do that a lot. But unfortunately, right now, speaking to you right now tonight, I'd say this is about as low as it's ever gotten, with the possible exception of January 6th. I am scheduled to fly back. We're supposed to be off this week for January 4th. I was almost on the red-eye flight from San Francisco, but because it's taking, fortunately, a while for what I refer to as the BUB bill, big ugly bill, to get out of the Senate, then we would have to go back and vote on it, most likely Wednesday, because the President of the United States wants to sign it on the 4th of July. This is they made up this deadline. We didn't go through the normal appropriations process. We can talk more about that. The deadline is when we would shut down, which we've had to do in the last 15 years because of our dysfunction, is October 30th. And normally, Appropriations Committee is meeting. So there is a process in Congress, just like there is in local government and the state legislature. We just don't adhere to it. And this bill, in my view, has been by far and away the biggest break from that process, that allows committees with subject area experts on the budget on both sides have a real close look at appropriations. And they're doing that right now, but if this bill goes through, it sort of precludes them from doing their work. So with that, let's just go through the PowerPoint. I need to start with this. We never used to have to do this, but because of the volatility, a lot of people will see town halls on the campaign side and wonder why I'm not more political on this side. It's because this rule is appropriate. You can express your feelings, but and I know this is a hard line. I'm the ranking member of the Ethics Committee, which means I'm the senior Democrat. So I actually sort of co-chair it with a Republican, Michael Getz, who's a friend from Mississippi. The Ethics Committee is the only committee in the House where there are equal numbers of majority and minority members. So 5 on both sides, and then the chairman and I generally work on the ethics issues together as a requirement about the rules. But just so you know, I strictly adhere to this. I know it doesn't make sense, sort of, because we're used to town halls and being very close to politics, but you can't use taxpayer funding to campaign on. So you can express yourself. So I just want to, that's a good disclaimer so you understand. If I'm on a political town hall, I can be as much of a Democrat as I want to be. This is our district. Every 10 years, the district lines get changed. The previous district I had was more east-west, but I only had downtown Antioch. Congressman Garamendi and I sort of switched. Congressman McNerney before represented a lot of this area. I have represented this area, 18 years, 19 years, often different sections of it based on redistricting. I've walked every precinct in Antioch when I ran for the Assembly with my very close friend, Tom Torlickson, who used to live not far from here. So that's the district. It's all of East County, except for Discovery Bay, that little elbow on the right, that's in Josh Harder's district. And then it goes in a part of Antioch, or Dublin at the bottom, so I get a little Alameda, but the rest of it's mostly 680 and the Highway 4 corridor and 24. Next. So specifically, when we were in charge, when Nancy Pelosi was Speaker, when the economy was doing a little bit better, we set aside money for Republicans and Democrats to go through the Appropriations Committee, work with local government and nonprofits to get district-specific projects. So these are two recent ones that we were able to get approved working with Antioch, with Ron and the police department, and a nonprofit Opportunity Junction. In total, since we started these, and my Republican colleagues have kept them going, we've got about, I think, about $50 million altogether, which I'm proud of because it's about as good as anyone's been able to get. But a lot of our success is because we have these long relationships with cities, school districts, and one that isn't up there that I'm particularly proud of that's now county-wide is the Anytime, Anywhere project that working with police departments and the county behavioral health, one of the first in the country. When you call and you're in distress, rather than having a police unit be the first responder, there are behavioral health experts who will show up. So domestic violence, and it's worked really, really well because a lot of those calls are people who the county is aware of and the PD is aware of. The PD goes out, but they're backup. So the people walking up to the door, and I've gone on ride-alongs with them countywide, and they're great. I'm really proud of our involvement. It's been millions of dollars we've gotten for that. This is the makeup right now. It's very tight, very close. We've flipped back and forth. There are roughly 25 seats out of 435 that are very close seats that go back and forth between Republicans and Democrats. The others, for a variety of reasons, gerrymandering and just how we cluster in America right now, the parties are more separated. Some of you may remember when I first ran for office, I was a Republican. I registered as a Republican when I was 18 years old in Boston because Republicans were liberal then, and I wanted to be, I believed in the social contract, and I switched sometimes later as the party changed. So that's the makeup. We've got 3 vacancies because 3 members got ill. 2 of them, all 3 of them passed away, so now there are special elections. In the House, you have to run every 2 years. The founders wanted us to run every 2 years. The Senate, 6 years, and they're staggered in the Senate. So this is sort of just the basic. As those of you who have seen our PowerPoints before, I'm going to go through this quickly, so if it's too fast, you can check your iPhones. They're available on our social media, on our website, all of them. But these are the big ones, the most recent ones, 16 million Americans, the Congressional Budget Office, and the Kaiser Family Foundation and others. Kaiser Family Foundation, since it's headquartered here in the East Bay, but very well respected, nonpartisan. They similar numbers, so we can get you the very voluminous evaluations on this. But 16 million Americans will lose their Medicaid, and that affects everybody. So in a country with 320 million, you sort of go, well, that's not a lot, but there's a multiplier because all of the hospitals out here take Medi-Cal, and that's Medicaid in California and Medicare. So it's got a, not just for those 16 million, but it affects the whole healthcare system. I think it's a huge mistake, and we're trying to get them to stop it. This is a new one, over 18 million kids will lose their school lunches. We've done a great job with school lunches for years, and we've made them much better based on research about what kids need to eat so that they get cognitive development. And I've been, myself and Congressman Miller, who preceded me in this seat, has done a lot of work over his 40 years as chairman of the Education Committee and my 10 and a half years. So cutting that is a bad investment. We get a big return on investment making sure kids can get really good food when they're at school. Pell Grants, these are for young people who don't have the money to get in a higher education, to get a bachelor's degree based on merit. The federal government's done this for years. Up until today, it's been very bipartisan. For every $1 we spend on Pell Grants, again, peer-reviewed research, the community gets $2.50 back because you're getting kids who are talented, they're getting a college degree, many of them go on to be doctors, I won't say lawyers, but some of them do, researchers or teachers. I had a conversation actually with a reporter earlier today from one of the TV stations, and when we got through, she said, I went to school on a Pell Grant. So a lot of teachers I hear from, and we get a return on that. So that's a particularly egregious one. It's a thing that I'm passionate about, is access to higher education based on merit, not based on your family income, is really important to the country. And we get lots of benefit from it. So cutting that's just awful. When I go back, I'll have a series of amendments that I'm hoping to force the Republicans have to vote for on the floor, just saying we're not going to do that. So it would be an amendment to this big bill. And we'll spend a long time. That's part of what's happening in the Senate right now, a lot of amendments to force people to take a position on specific things rather than just the whole bill. And one of the things that's really odd to me is there's having owned small businesses, we all know there's a point where you take on debt and you take on too much, you get in trouble. We're now at, compared to other countries, as a percentage of GDP, our national debt has been relatively low, but their tax structure is different in France and England and in Europe. They have a much more robust tax system. So this is particularly bad, is increasing our national debt right now. And it's, to my Republican colleagues, I'm like, well, you always campaign on, you want to reduce the deficit and the debt. And one of the people who's been a leader of this, Chip Roy, leader in the sense of saying we can't add to the debt, very conservative, from Texas, he's one of the people who says he'll vote against it because of this. So they need 3 votes if it gets out of the Senate. They need 3 Republican votes. We need 3 Republican votes to vote with us to stop it. And then we could have a long discussion about, let's do it in public. Let's have debates about this. You still have the majority, but go through the process. Let the public follow the process and let it be fully evaluated, the consequences of your decision. Eliminates a lot of the tax credits for clean energy. I've been very involved with this. I was appointed to something called the California Air Resources by 2 Republican governors when I was in local government and 1 Democrat. In those days, it was bipartisan, how do we clean the air? And then with carbon emissions, it's become, and everything else, it's become more partisan. But as you know here, we've been really leaders in the whole country in terms of transitioning to a cleaner and more efficient energy future. We've got 5 refineries in this area. 4 of them are very important to the tax base in Contra Costa into the school districts. So we're being very thoughtful about how do we transition and have options so we don't get left behind while we still meet our goals on climate change to change the trajectory that's impacting our weather faster than the model showed us 20 years ago, which is not good. And let's see, so you see the score, the vote, when it went out of the House, 215 to 214. That's why I need to make sure that I get on my plane and get back there. This, of course, I'm sure we'll have questions about this. The things that are going on in the Middle East, having been in the Middle East multiple times. Americans, particularly Americans in the West, it's sort of hard to comprehend no matter how much you read about it and listen to experts, Republican, Democrats about the Middle East, but it's hard for us to imagine the historic density, thousands of years, and the geographic proximity. I mean, you can drive across Israel in a few hours. I mean, everything's very, very close, and then you combine that with ancient history and grievances. It's hard, it's a very complex place. So it's frustrating because it is so complex, but you've got to really be thoughtful about the consequences of your actions. And sometimes you've got to act, so you can't, there are times you've got to act. But a lot of this is based on how we decide. So the founders decided the power for the purse and declaring war, amongst other things, are in the Constitution. Only Congress can do that. Well, obviously, wars have changed since the 1700s. So we should look at that and allow for that. The Congress did in the War Powers Act, so everything that happened in Vietnam, Korea before that, how do we address this publicly and transparently and thoughtfully and still be true to the Constitution, knowing that times change? So my strong feeling is that what he did was too impulsive, and now getting more analysis of the success of that is expensive, and you've got to question the wisdom of it. Nobody wants Iran to have a nuclear weapon. If you go back to when Obama was president, I was there for the last 2 years and met with all the negotiators, including from Russia, France, England, all the major powers that were part of that negotiations. We had UN inspectors on the ground, so we knew what they had. We don't have that now because we broke away from that process, and I think that was a huge mistake because we would have been further along on the diplomatic sense and would be able to see what they have on the ground. If they threw us out, that's a different situation, but they didn't want to do that because they're afraid of sanctions. We've sanctioned them, but we didn't do it collaboratively with our partners. Remember George W. Bush, H.W. Bush, one of his big successes in the Middle East, because he was such an expert at foreign affairs, was building a coalition so that when we went into Iraq, it was so overwhelming. And that's what you need, and I think in the Middle East, and going it alone, even for the United States to go it alone, it doesn't work well historically. Next. Immigration policies. We have an immigration court in Concord. I've been down there. I've walked in by myself, not trying to get on press. I just walked in and sit there. You can do that. The courts have to be open to the public. And the problem with immigration in this country is we do have a problem. I don't know a Democrat or anyone who believes in completely open borders. So how we got labeled with that? We've had bills in the last 11 years that were bipartisan Republican and Democratic bills. The first was just before I got there. It was the Gang of Eight, 4 Republican senators, 4 Democratic senators. John McCain was one of the lead authors. Michael Rubio, the now Secretary of State, and Chuck Schumer, Richard Durbin, the 2 leaders in the Senate, came up with a strategy that we're going to put more money into the border, more judges for asylum process, and more people to enforce the laws, and then a long-term employment-based strategy so that if you were here for 20 years, you could get a permit as long as you worked and didn't get in trouble. You had 20 years to apply for citizenship, and then it was blown up deliberately. We had another bill 8 years ago, a Republican Democratic bill. Again, it got pulled, and then just recently we had a bill I wouldn't have voted for, Republican Democratic bill that candidate Trump came out and said he didn't want it to go any further, so Senate didn't move it. So my own belief is, when you read the history of immigration in this country, as I've done and visited people, it's part of our history. We have these, we're the biggest country in the world that's ever tried to take people from all over the world and blend them together. And there's a challenge in that. E pluribus unum out of many, one, and we've had these challenges. And we should be proud of the fact that we do it. But you have to be thoughtful, again, about how you do it in immigration. So this was done, and it's been done in our history to divide us because it works in politics, and it's not very constructive. Okay, so 164 executive orders. Right now, because we're in the minority and we don't have the White House, we do strategies, and we will be doing them. We're doing them right now to slow the process down and try to put maximum pressure to get people to join us on the majority side. But you saw that first one about how close it is and how rigid people are. So in the first administration, that last bullet, we and our partners on the outside, law firms, nonprofits, won 78% of the cases. We're 96% now. So these executive orders, they have to go through the process. That's the way the government is worked. There are 3 branches of government, and Democrat and Republican presidents have argued about how much authority they have on executive power. Sort of like a city manager and a city council sometimes, but that's closer to home. But this is extreme. No presidents have ever written these amount of executive orders and so broadly. So we go to court, and the courts have said, Republican and Democratic judges appointed by this president, have said, no, you have to go through the legislature. You want to change a bill, immigration, you can't unilaterally change it from the White House. We don't want that to happen for any president because it takes away the democratic process. Go through the legislature. If you can get the votes there, you can write a bill, and then the president has to sign it, and the courts have to do their job and say it's either constitutional or it's not. So far, 96% of the cases in the since January 20th, the administration's lost. So I won't go through the detail on all this because I've already gone too long, but I love these two quotes. For those of you frequent flyers, I'm a history major. I love quotes. Benjamin Franklin, that's a great quote. I love Benjamin Franklin. He walked out of Constitution Hall, and somebody asked him, what have we got? And he said, it's a republic if you can keep it. So almost 250 years ago. And I think of this quote, when I walk to vote, I walk across the eastern portico of the Capitol. Thank you for letting me do it. It's still wonderful to have that responsibility. But I'm old enough to remember Jack Kennedy having this quote. People remember the ask not quote, but this one particularly applies to the time we're living in. He was talking about totalitarianism in the Soviet Union when he said this in the 60s. So, all right. And if you want to keep up with us, a wonderful staff does a great job of notifying people frequently of what we're up to. And I do want to recognize Nadim, who runs our Antioch office. We've got an office not far from here. He was nice enough to introduce everybody, but he's about to leave us for, I don't know why anybody would stop working for me, but you know, I got an ego. He's about to leave us to go to Harvard Law School, so we're very proud of him. He's a wonderful, ethical person and obviously very bright, so I'm a little like a parent. Don't change, don't let them make them make you be a good lawyer, but don't change your wonderful qualities. So, with that. We're going to get away from each other?
Thank you, Congressman. So now we'll start our question and answer section of the town hall. If there are any remaining question cards in the audience you'd like to submit, please raise them in the air. Any remaining question cards to submit?
And while they're doing that, I just really want to thank the school district. Mary, please thank your colleagues and the superintendent. I really want to thank Ron and the city council for all their work. We work closely, and I do really want to thank the Antioch Police Department as well. They've been through, all of them have been through some struggles, so if we can give them a round of applause. Having done a lot of ride-alongs over the years and a former juvenile probation officer, they have really tough jobs. So we want to support them and get the support they need.
And a quick reminder, we will not get through every single question, but again, if your contact information is legibly written, we will respond after the town hall.
There are people online who think that we edit these all, but we don't. We did this a while ago somewhere, and people were saying I was taking too many from certain parts. I'm not smart enough to figure that out.
First question is from Christopher from Antioch. He asks, what can we do to stop HR1, the one big beautiful bill, from passing?
So HR1 is a bill we refer to, this huge bill to change policy, change everything I put up there. Actually, the Senate parliamentarian did a really good job. So both houses have parliamentarians. They're nonpartisan. They have to follow our rules that we agree on to govern the place. And she got some of the worst things out. You're not supposed to, so the threshold in the Senate is you need 60 votes to pass policy. On budget, you need a majority vote. So a lot of what they put in here, from my perspective, are more policy. Of course, budget and policy is connected. If you don't have the money, you can't affect policy. So she took a lot out. Elections have consequences. And we lost this election to a very aggressive group. And we just have to, what I said in the opening, we've got to find 3 votes. And David Valadeo, who's not far from here, east, south, almost a third of his constituents are Medicaid constituents. David and I served in the legislature. And in the old days, we used to work together. And I've had conversations with him that got unusually sharp. Because he's got a lot of pressure on him. He said he's not going to vote for it. So if he holds on, that's only 2. So there's a lot of pressure on a lot of people not to vote for it. As I said, and I'm being redundant, if they vote no, it doesn't end it. They still have a majority in the White House, in both houses, for 2.5 years. What are you afraid of, folks? Let's just have an open discussion about this and see if we can, there are parts of it, and if we went back and looked at it, they could probably get my vote on it. I believe in efficiency, for instance. I don't believe in what Elon Musk did was even remotely efficient. But that's the process. And there's, first do no harm. So what we have to do is I'll be submitting amendments. We will talk a lot. We will continue to, both on the floor to slow it down. The Rules Committee, of which I used to be vice chair of when we were in the majority, depending on when they schedule it, I'll be back to present my amendments in the Rules Committee in the U.S. Capitol. And we'll just keep pushing them through and on the floor. But ultimately, if we don't get 3 Republicans to switch, it'll pass. So you have to stay at it. There's a lot of procedural things we can do that the Senate's doing right now that I completely support to slow it down, to put more pressure on them. So those are the things we can do. But folks, you got to win elections, and we've got to get back to a point where we work together. It's a big country. There are people that are very different, and we've got to respect that, but we've got to respect all of us. And until then, we've got to fight like hell to make sure we don't damage this country any further until we get back to a country where people, 320 million people from very different perspectives, that we respect we have differences of opinions, and we still fight like hell, but not like this. We listen to one another and understand. I've got a colleague, I bring this up at other town halls, Virginia Fox, who used to be the chair of the Education Committee. I always say, Virginia, you couldn't get elected in my district, and I couldn't get elected in yours in North Carolina. I understand that. So we should respect the fact that our voters disagree. So we're going to fight like hell, but ultimately elections matter, and we have to get this country back to a point where patriotism is about respecting everybody, but also following the rule of law. You got to follow the Constitution. There's a reason we've lasted for almost 250 years, a year from this July 4th. It's because the founders were brilliant, and all this diffused power works. It can be frustrating as hell, but it works. As Winston Churchill once said, he had a great line I've been thinking about later. Churchill said, the best argument against democracy, this is Churchill, not me, is a 5-minute conversation with the average voter. And then he said, but it's still the best form of government ever devised by humans. So we just gotta, we're gonna do everything we can to stop this from happening. All the procedural things we'll do. We'll try to adjourn. We've tried to adjourn multiple times, but all they have to do is vote to table the motion, which they've done multiple times. That's not to say we won't try it, because it continues to put pressure on people to do the right thing, which is to vote against it, and let's have a full debate about it.
Great. Second question is from Melissa. How do you justify California's commitment to providing taxpayer-funded resources to undocumented immigrants while chronically underfunding the mental health treatments to our homeless and veterans?
So, did everybody hear that question? So the question was, how do you justify, correct me if I'm wrong, barrister to be, how do you justify paying for services to immigrants who are not here legally by today's standards, as opposed to underfunding the VA? That's a great question. These are horrible choices all the time, and it's about priorities. Personally, I would go back to the Eisenhower-era taxes, which were much more progressive. Eisenhower. We had the largest growth in the middle class, upward mobility, with all our problems we had in those days. But we taxed corporations and the wealthy higher, and then we put it into schools and systems in the VA. We have had a long history of changing that. Even though the total has gone up as the population's grown and the GDP's grown, the services, the funding of the services have gone down. So the question is whether you should do that. And that's up to the states, but I support it when I was a county supervisor and when I was in the legislature. Why? Because they're here, and the federal government needs to fix our immigration policy. And it's what I alluded to before. There are people who deliberately don't want to fix it. We need immigrants for our workforce. In the business I was in, the hospitality industry, restaurants. You couldn't run a restaurant right now without people who are here from Central and South America. So the same thing happened when my great-grandparents came from the French Canadians and the Irish, which I'm mostly. It was this, read the history of immigration in this country. We need to replace people, so we need immigration right now for our economy. Employers know this, but we need to reform our laws to make them consistent with our needs as Americans and our economy, which means we need workers. So we provide these services, and when I was on the county board 20 years ago, we had a robust debate about this. And the reality is, if somebody's here, they're going to end up in the county emergency room. So it's smarter to provide services before and hope that the federal government gets their act together, because the county health department can't remove them from being here, but they'll be in the ambulance and they'll be part of that public health system. So if you get diseases, it'll get worse. So the theory was it's better off bringing them in and having them in here and having the whole community safer. So I understand the problem, but I don't think it's as easy as you should not spend the money on it and you could put more money in the VA, because they're still going to be here. And then you have other economic consequences to the whole system. I hope that made sense. I'm going to try to be more succinct. Generally, we enjoy our jobs, but we work really hard. And my staff, we're one of only 6 offices out of 535 have been recognized for our constituent services by an independent nonprofit in DC. It's called the Congressional Management Service, and we're really proud of that because they work really hard. And if you call our office, somebody will answer the phone 9 to 5. Sometimes it's me, which is really fun when somebody, every once in a while I'll answer the phone and somebody go, wait a minute, who is this? Usually because I don't know what I'm talking about. No, I'm only kidding. All right.
Third question is from Neil from Concord. What are you going to do about the Republicans voting to remove the tax cuts in the One Big Beautiful Bill? Remove the tax cuts.
Well, I mentioned in my opening that I have an amendment that we're preparing that would eliminate the tax cut on the very wealthiest, where CBO says 85% of the benefit of that for the it's been in place. This is what they did when they had control of the White House and both houses are Republicans the first time. Their biggest accomplishment was this tax, but it was sunsetted for now. So that means that if it doesn't get extended, it ends. So my amendment would just change it to say you're not going to give it all to people who don't need it, making over $7 million a year just on their regular income, including their investments, in a time when we're in the highest concentration in the history of the country right now, which is not good for anybody. I can go on for hours about that. It's more, we've got to get it back to like the Eisenhower administration where money is spread around. It's better for everybody. There's plenty of research on this. So taking out my amendment, just taking out that, I would argue you're still giving middle-class people a little more cash and helping them with the price of eggs and other things that we've got to get a handle on. And the cost of housing. I mean, the cost of housing where we live is really killing younger generations. We've got to build more product, and we've got to make sure that people can finance this. And then student debt for people who are able to go to college. They've got student debt. It's not like my generation. I'm a middle boomer. When I came to California, there were 16 million people. My kids hate me saying this. When I was a bartender, I had a one-bedroom apartment in the marina for $300 a month. That apartment now would be $3,000 a month. So that's just, for all of us who are older, we got to remember how fortunate we were that the economy was working for everybody then, and we've got to get back to that. So the tax cut is good if we do it responsibly and give it to people who need the help, not to people who are obscenely wealthy and are hoarding most of the money. There's lots of research on this. The whole idea of trickle-down doesn't work. If you've got a lot of money, you keep it in investments. The rest of us, we go out to restaurants, we go to the mall, we spend the money. Actually, we have another problem. We have to get back to saving more. But very wealthy people, the research says, keep the money, and then it keeps accumulating. Lincoln famously said, you've got to keep labor, meaning wages, and capital even in a capitalistic democracy. If capital ever gets too far out of whack, Lincoln said you lose democracy. Well, that's sort of what we've got right now.
Next question is from Terry from Antioch. Didn't the Supreme Court pass law that lower courts can't interfere with Trump's laws?
So this goes to the decision yesterday. So the argument was, right now you can take, and people do this, they judge shop, court shop. They go to different parts of the country based on where they think they're going to get a judge, a federal judge, who will agree with them. So the Ninth Circuit here in San Francisco is considered the most progressive. Anyway, so both sides have done this. So one federal judge, prior to this decision, could preliminarily put a national injunction on something like many of the cases I talked about on executive orders. And then goes to an appeal court. They either overturn it or sustain it, keep it, and then you can appeal it up to the Supreme Court. It's a slow process, but it's worked for a long time. Supreme Court just decided, changing precedent, that a federal judge cannot do a nationwide injunction. So that's going to have very serious consequences, and it changes the game. So federal judges, Justice Roberts had to speak right after this decision to a conference of federal judges, and I would love to have been there to hear their comments, because he was talking the day after, I think, they made the judgment. So it's going to be, we're going to have to see what happens, but from what the legal experts at places like Harvard tell us, it could have very profound policy and procedural consequences.
Grab a handful as he reads. You're going through them. That's great. That'll work.
I know I'm not being succinct.
Next question is from Dr. Jeffrey Klingsler from Antioch. Trump's big, beautiful bill passed by one vote. Is the House so dysfunctional that you cannot convince one moderate Republican to vote against it? Do you even know 9 California Republicans in the House, and do you even talk to them?
Yeah, so I talk to them frequently. It's gotten harder, so the question is back to, how do we get Republicans to vote against the one? I'll be talking to them tomorrow. I've had a lot of conversations. One of the things is why we've got here is the Koch brothers and their affiliates. They believe in, their father was head of the John Birch Society. He believed in a very libertarian form of government in the United States. Their theory is that government's grown too big and America was established with a very small, particularly federal government, but we don't live in the 1800s anymore, so let's make it more efficient. So trying to convince people so the big decision the Koch brothers did was they've spent 40 years getting judicial appointees. That's why we've got the 5 people on the Supreme Court. They were very strategic about it. And in the lower courts, well, they've done the same thing in the Electoral College. They know where the votes are to win the Electoral College. And they've also done the same thing in Congress. But their biggest success that I think created this mess was something called Citizens United, a decision at the Supreme Court 5-4, 10, 15 years ago, that said money equals speech. So we have to run under campaign contribution levels set by whatever jurisdiction you're on, and that's transparent. It's connected to our relationship with people who support us. Independent expenditures, the Supreme Court said, is separate. So as long as the people who are funding these campaigns and independent expenditures don't talk to the campaign, whether it's city council or Congress or president, that's legal. Before that decision, it was considered that it all had to go through whatever that jurisdiction's transparency laws were. So now I think the last presidential election, this is why you asked the question, why one person can spend $250 million in one election cycle, Elon Musk. How could that be? Independent expenditures. So this has created this polarization where we who have to run in primaries, meaning state legislatures and Congress, have to worry about the primary more than the general. So if you remember, I said 25 seats out of 435 determine whether Republicans or Democrats. Well, that's why people worry about primaries, because most people have to worry about somebody running against them, incumbents and challengers, who they don't know are going to get millions of dollars in TV ads and all kinds of things that vilify them. So that really changed everything. So trying to get back to the premise of the question is, they're more worried about a primary where somebody spends millions of dollars, not just getting them to lose the primary, a Republican primary, but to vilify them. In communities where frequently their grandparents lived, they lived, and it's very deliberately psychological, and it's paralyzed, in my view, both parties, but it's not asymmetrical. It's the Koch brothers focused. If you read Jane Mayer's work on this, she spent 10 years. She wrote a book called Dark Money and other things. They focused on Republican primaries, and that's why the party, in my view, switched. That's one of the reasons I left. Jim Jeffords, a great Republican from Vermont, 10 years ago, became an independent, and he had a great line. They said, "Why'd you leave?" He said, "I didn't leave the Republican Party, it left me." Well, when you follow it, it's just parties change over time. I mean, the party of Lincoln is not the party we have now. So they change, that's part of our process. But this very sophisticated effort, most people don't understand. There's plenty of good writing on it, but that independent expenditure thing you really have to watch in presidential elections, in legislative elections, and in congressional elections. And that's why it's hard, because they're trying to get as far to that base, to those people as possible, because if they don't, they'll pay the punishment. What's changed a little bit is Trump is now, they're afraid of both the Koch brothers and Trump, and they're working together more. This is why, I don't know if you saw the quote by Elon Musk today, I think. He said, he said that any Republican who votes for this bill, I actually like his motivation for a change, that he would make sure they were primaried. So he'll just set up an independent expenditure and spend millions of dollars. Well, I might like the result in this case. I didn't like what he did before, but that's not democracy, folks. We've got campaign funds are part of it, but it shouldn't be at this level. We should be out talking to people and convincing them individually to vote for us as much as possible.
Next question is from Joseph. Do you support or oppose the president's military strike in Iran, and why?
I do not support what he did in Iran. That'll be easy. I'll have a succinct answer. How's that? I did not support it. I think I alluded to this in my opening comments.
Next question is from Timothy. What can we do to support industry-type jobs? Those jobs with trades or that only require high school diplomas? Sorry. How do we support industry jobs or those with trades?
That's a great question, particularly. So the question is, how do we support industry jobs? Well, this is really important for where we live. Those refineries, the chemical business, we have a lot of good industrial jobs that you don't need a college degree for. So we've put a lot of effort in California. When I got in the legislature, we had sort of really taken a lot of funding out of career tech shop. Actually, I was out here multiple times sort of figuring out how I could help with this, and we started spending more money 20 years ago on career tech. It's really important. Everybody doesn't need a bachelor's degree, and I would question the wisdom of everybody having a bachelor's degree. You still need somebody to come out and fix your plumbing. You need an electrician. And I will say here in Contra Costa, we have a really world-class building trades union. We require continuous certification. This is a bill that I helped. I was the chair of the Labor Committee at the time, and the governor of California called me after it passed out, and we were putting money into career tech. And get a phone call from Jerry Brown. Whatever his stream of consciousness is, he'd just start talking. So, it's not, "Hi, how are you?" It's just pick up the phone, and he's like, "Everybody tells me I should talk to you. Should I sign this?" I said, "Jerry, we want to get back to what America was in the 50s, where we're giving career tech, where people can be great. The Germans have done this for years. some time ago I was in Germany, and they said, they had a craft history culture, but post-World War II, it was part of the Marshall Plan to make sure that Europeans and our enemies, and our former enemies, got people to work. So these are really good programs, and we're doing it. You are required, it's SB 54, which I was a co-author of. You have to go through a state-approved apprenticeship program, which was part of my conversation with the governor. I said, Jerry, you nominate the 5 people on the Apprenticeship Standards Board. If we put good people on there, not political people, people who understand we want product, then I was chair of the Labor Committee, so I had to agree to put them on. Then let's do it based on return on value. Now that's been 20 years ago, and it's worked. So that's how we get good career jobs. You can get out of high school. You know, in these refineries right now, if you graduate from Antioch High School, Richmond High School, Mount Diablo, you can go out there as a carpenter, electrician, a steel worker, and you can make $120,000 a year with benefits. And that all accrues to all of us. And the industry, you know, it's funny, they fought it at the time, but now they'll come and say, God, you know, these workers are really skilled. They're a lot better than the people in Texas and Louisiana. It's like, well, duh. If you train them and continuously train them, you get a better work product. Does it cost more? Yes, but in the long run, it's actually costs less because you don't have the explosions, you don't have the interruptions, and you have a more skilled workforce. But you have to do it based on evaluation of what the certifications are and what people are getting out of it. And if it's not working, you should go back and change it. Sorry, this is a subject near and dear to my heart. And as a senior member of the Labor Committee, I continue to try to do this on a national level. I have some funny conversations with some of my Republican colleagues from other parts of the country. But
Next question is from Brian from Alamo. With layoffs, Doge, and AI, how will we pay off the deficit if everyone is out of work?
that's a great question. So the question is, with layoffs and the attacks on the federal workforce, how do we get to a point to do the work and actually deal with the deficit? The federal workforce is divided into sections. Most federal workers work in DC, but San Francisco is called Region 9. So we have a lot of federal workers in this area who commute into EPA, Department of Education, Labor, every federal. You know, I don't. We've always had a suspicion of government. It's part of our culture. And when you think about how this country was formed, Gary Will's a great author, called it a necessary evil, where Americans, you know, when we started, we didn't trust big institutions, religious and the English government. But on the other hand, and he said a necessary evil because he thought our suspicion actually made it work better. But it gets to a point of diminishing returns where you're driving people away. I mean, we're in a public school. You have to have good teachers. And for teachers who aren't doing a good job, you've got to evaluate them and see how you can get them to do a good job. And you also can't measure everything, but you can certainly measure enough. Our federal workforce, I mean, I get emotional about the people in the time I've been in office that I've gone on ride-alongs, gone out and seen what they've done at refineries, seen what they've done, TSA agents, FAA people. We get value out of federal employees. And Ron knows this, 20 years as an employee here before I don't know if it's an ascending to be mayor or, but the question is, we as taxpayers, do we get value? And I think we need to do a much better job of evaluating what we get and letting the public know. Because I think this idea of government employees as somehow being inefficient, lazy, all those right-wing stereotypes is not what I've experienced in my experience. I've been out with folks, and we get great value. A lot of people who could make more money working on the public sector choose to do it because they love to work and love to serve the community. I'll tell you, as a survivor of cancer, the researchers I've seen who work for the federal government, I get emotional. These kids, they're amazing. And yeah, at some point in their career, a lot of them leave and make more money, but they save people's lives. Just on cancer, because I was just on a panel about this before I came over here. As a survivor of stage 4 cancer, the investments we made, starting in the Nixon administration, but in public research, which this president in this big bill, he wants to cut the American Cancer Institute budget by 37%. Since 1990, the mortality rate has gone up by that amount, almost that amount. So people like me would have been dead if we didn't invest in those public employees who created the public research that then the private sector went and made money off of and added to it. So the Doge thing was just so stupid. I mean, this idea that because you own a business and make a lot of money, as somebody who owned a business and believes in efficiency, small, but you just don't go off and chop everybody by 25%. Right, Ron? You're a manager. You evaluate people, and you continue to look at ways to make it more efficient. What he did was absolutely one of the dumbest things. Well, there have been a lot of dumb things lately, but it was counterproductive to efficiency. And then how do you get young people to go into those jobs when they've got to think about raising kids and paying a mortgage if they're worried about an election where all of a sudden they don't have the seniority that other people's go, and somebody just comes in and says, well, I'm going to create efficiency, so I'm just going to eliminate 10% of the workforce. So this is going to have long-term effects. Fortunately, the courts have ruled against almost all of them, but there has been, all of this has been a price, even with the courts choosing, because people have left. And I know people have left. And this started in his first term. He directed it at EPA, and because I've done a lot of air regulation over the years, we lost a lot of good people because they loved what they did, but they left. So our air quality is not as good as it would have been if you had those professionals, dedicated professionals there. And yeah, it's, well, so we're just going to have to keep fighting like everything else. But I really appreciate the question. We need to value people who do good work. You know, I always say about teachers as a senior member of the Education Committee, we need good teachers. We got to attract, and we do get good teachers, but when you look at people in other developed countries, what a teacher gets paid as opposed to the United States, sort of, we've got to value people based on, not on some stereotype about whether they work for the government or not.
Thank you, Congressman.
I'm getting body language. That was their way of telling me to shut up.
So that will do it for our question and answer section, but before I pass it back to the Congressman to give you a few closing words, I do want to recognize Mayor of Brentwood, Susanna Meyer, who happened to join us this evening. Thank you. All right. All right, Congressman, the floor is all yours.
Can we give a round of applause for... I bet there's not one other person in your class who could say that they've done congressional town halls when you get there. Anyways, I want to thank my staff. Again, thanks to the City of Antioch. Ron, thank you so much. To all of you for coming. To the PD, thank you. But mostly just encourage you to stay engaged. We'll answer your questions. We've got 15 staff people from DC, between DC, our Walnut Creek office, and our Antioch office. So they take a while, but we'll answer your questions. And I just really encourage you. A quote that wasn't up there that I love is Louis Brandeis, remarkable justice. He said, famously, he said, the most important title in America is that of citizen. People have fought and died and aspired for the simple thing that we get. We're citizens of the United States of America. Get emotional. That doesn't say you're a Republican or Democrat. You have your own unique perspective, but being a citizen is about being engaged and being open-minded. So thank you so much for taking the time to be here. Thanks.